economy powers anywhere in the world. They have the potential of it. Do you agree?
Of course, the main role of the British ambassador in Pyongyang is to represent the interests of my government and to provide briefing and advice to my government. Rather unusually, the British ambassador in Pyongyang has a slightly broader role, and because there is no Japanese, no US, no Republic of Korea mission in the DPRK, part of my role as ambassador was to travel to the capitals of countries with which we have such close relations and to share insights. While in Pyongyang, I would also, of course, meet North Korean officials, and I would reflect to them my own views, the views of my government, and I would try also to reflect to them my understanding of the world situation, including the views of the American government. The DPRK certainly has considerable concerns about the United States, but this was something that I did see change in my time there. Through 2016 and 2017, we of course had the process of escalating nuclear tests and escalating ballistic missile launches. Throughout that period, the rhetoric and the propaganda about the United States was extremely strong, arguing that the United States was a threat to the DPRK, a nuclear threat to the DPRK. We saw that change, not immediately in 2018, but during the course of 2018. And one of the most striking features of my year in the DPRK as ambassador in 2018 was the removal of military anti-US propaganda. Of course, the US and the DPRK continue to need to build confidence and trust in each other, and the DPRK continues to criticize the United States and to treat the United States as a threat, but of a rather different kind. The propaganda now that is aimed at the United States is not about the military threat, but it is about the risk to the DPRK of US capitalism, of certain US values. So you can tell from that that there is still a level of mistrust, but there has been a very dramatic change in the way that the US is portrayed and President Trump is portrayed, which we saw throughout 2018. When we were dealing with North Korean officials, to some extent they were warmer, only to some extent. People we dealt with were perhaps a little bit more relaxed, and the things we saw happening in the city were a little different. In 2018, we saw lots of school children through the year preparing for the mass games, the mass athletics, which had not been staged for some time, which was a better thing to see than preparing for military parades, though that happened too in 2018, or preparing for large political rallies. We also saw throughout my time in Pyongyang some of the development of landmark building projects by Kim Jong-un, for instance the opening of the Ryomyong Street. So the appearance of Pyongyang did change. I have to say, outside Pyongyang, the changes were much less marked, and in the countryside, life remains pretty Spartan, though it appears to be quite well organized. One of the changes in Pyongyang that you're probably aware of is that there are more restaurants than there used to be, and that the quality of restaurants is quite high. But for the most part, the food in those restaurants was Korean food, though you could also have Japanese food. I ate some quite good Japanese food when I was there, and there was good Italian food. I can't say I remember terribly good British food in the restaurants, though in the establishments that cater to the diplomatic community, the Friendship restaurant, for instance, they have put one or two British items on the menu. They weren't my first choice.
While you were there in Pyongyang, have you raised this issue among other human rights issues in DPRK to the officials of DPRK?
Yes, when I have spoken to the DPRK officials about human rights issues, I have referred to the abduction issue as among those issues. And I have made clear that this important issue between Japan and the DPRK is an issue which needs to be resolved.
And how was the reaction from the officials?
The reaction from officials whenever I raise human rights issues, or whenever I raised human rights issues, was usually discouraging. I never had a substantive response from the DPRK on the issue of abductions.
Do you think there is an appetite on DPRK's side to negotiate with Japan?
They give no sign of that at the moment. After the DPRK changed its relationship with the United States and its rhetoric and propaganda towards the United States, it actually started to replace some of its anti-US messages with anti-Japanese messages. And the signs they have given suggest that for now they wish to keep Japan at arm's length. I nevertheless believe that at some point the DPRK will be ready to talk to Japan if progress is made in the discussions with the United States and more generally. And despite the propaganda, there have of course been contacts between Japan and the DPRK.
Sure. So do you miss Pyongyang?
I am very pleased to be back in London, and there are many things I enjoy in London that I was unable to enjoy in Pyongyang. Perhaps a little to my surprise, I have found that I do miss being in Pyongyang in the sense of having my finger on the pulse in Pyongyang. And I read with great care and attention the reports which my successor, Colin Crooks, is sending from Pyongyang. So yes, I miss that aspect of the job.